Well, in the past few months, there has been a sharp rise in anti-Semitic language splashed across college campuses and public parks nationwide. And people are starting to notice the trend. According to a poll by the American Jewish Committee, 82% of American Jews say that anti-Semitism has increased in the last 5 years. 14% say it has stayed the same. And joining me now is Rabbi Yaakov Menken, Managing Director at the Coalition for Jewish Values. Rabbi Menken, so good to see you again. Let's talk about those poll numbers. Do they surprise you at all? And what do you think is fueling this rise in anti-Semitism?
First of all, the only surprise to me is the 14% who don't recognize that anti-Semitism is rising in the country. It's a very sad phenomenon. It's obviously been fueled by the anti-Israel narrative. Anti-Semitism always, even the name anti-Semitism, is a facade, a euphemism for Jew hatred. It was actually developed in Germany pre the Nazi era, and it was considered very acceptable to be an anti-Semite. Well, today it's considered to be anti-Israel is considered acceptable when nobody is anti a country.
You know, as we mentioned, I know that you know, there's been a number of anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, most recently at George Washington University in D.C., where a copy of the Torah was purposely damaged during a burglary at a fraternity party, fraternity house, that is. How concerning is that to you, to see these types of incidents occurring at institutions of higher learning where you would think people would be more tolerant?
It's not about the one incident. It's about the wave of incidents. The fact that today, as we saw over the summer, quote unquote pro-Palestinian protests turned into random assaults on individual Jews who were nearby. And yeah, actually, it's felt the most on college campuses. We have a history to look at. The historical record is very clear that half of the architects of the Nazis' final solutions, the Wannsee Conference, half the people there had PhDs. So academic excellence is no substitute for moral courage and moral backbone, not to mention a moral compass.
Yeah, and meantime, earlier this week, the Israeli ambassador to the UK was harassed while she was speaking at the London School of Economics, and then she had to be rushed out to her vehicle by guards. What more do you know about that situation, and what does all this signal?
Well, it's actually, I'll give you one very simple thing. I mean, she was able to complete her talk, which is a very, obviously that was a good sign. She was protected. They were able to actually have a debate and a discussion, which, of course, is exactly that which the haters were trying to close down. They don't want to have a discussion. They don't want to hear voices, because if you hear both sides, it's actually very clear that they are portraying, they're just giving you a false narrative. But in any case, when she came out, they started yelling at her, "Are you ashamed? Israel's a terrorist state," et cetera, et cetera. And I was immediately reminded of historical footage from the Nazi era of people, including young men and women, yelling at people coming out of their synagogues about how they should be ashamed for all the bad things that Jews have been doing. Well, how little has changed.
Yeah, so concerning. Earlier this week, Vice President Harris spoke out against anti-Semitism. Not sure if you heard that or not, but do you think maybe the words that she spoke were strong enough of a rebuke? And what would you like to see from the Biden administration?
Well, her words to the ADL conference were actually very good. She said all the right things. She hit all the right notes. The problem is that within the past 2 months, there was a college student at a campus that she visited, and I'm not even sure was that not George Washington, where a student accused Israel of ethnic genocide, and her reaction was to say, "Oh, it's so important that we have your voice." That was a moment for moral courage. Again, it was a time to have a moral voice and say, wait a minute. When you have an Arab community that has the longest lifespans in the region, the best medical care, the best access to higher education, the lowest infant mortality, and you call that genocide, you're doing it wrong. And she was not willing to say that. The Biden administration has to look. I mean, the progressive left that is now driving so much of the narrative in all these economic issues and the new funding that they want to get approved, the same progressive left has been promoting this anti-Semitic narrative about Israel and at large, thus, about Jews. And we're not hearing the condemnations of that need to be said.
Oh, Rabbi, so much more we could talk about, but unfortunately we have to wrap things up. Thank you so much for coming on and weighing in on this for us.
Thank you for having me.